Okay, any questions? Thanks, my colleagues.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, Josh.
So you guys are talking a lot about the timeline element with NEPA.
Yeah.
The regulation that you're targeting, which is the phase 1 of NEPA reforms, is just dealing with, the main change there is saying that you should account for, agencies should account for direct, indirect effects.
Cumulative effects, yeah.
Meaning greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, it's more, no, but it's more, but it's,
More is the timeline piece. So they haven't actually done anything.
no, but it's actually more than that. And when you have the ability of agencies, there was a really good Wall Street Journal editorial today. We put it on your chair, so take a look at that. But there's nobody who's serious on these issues who doesn't agree that that NEPA reg that was promulgated in April is going to make it harder to do infrastructure and is going to make it longer timelines and more litigation. I mean, well, not climate, it's the focus on the impacts of the project itself. And what this regulation does is it takes that and it essentially explodes that on cumulative impacts almost anywhere as it relates to a project. It's kind of unending. And then you can have, and you will have, by those groups that I mentioned, who are opposed to my resolution, the ability for them to look at the reg and sue and gum this up even further. So what we are trying to do right now is say, this is actually remarkable. The president touts as one of his biggest achievements the bipartisan infrastructure bill that a number of us supported last fall. And then they come out with a NEPA rule that undoubtedly will make it harder to deploy the capital to build infrastructure. And that's why you're looking at over 50 groups across the country, as diverse as can be. But what I'm most proud of, look at all the labor unions that are focused on this. Those regs, they know it. Look what Terry O'Sullivan, look what Callahan say. They know those regs, including the April reg. This was the LIUNA statement on the April regs, saying don't do it. You're going to kill jobs. They did it. So what's remarkable about this is just how the White House is at war with itself. They say they want to build infrastructure, then they put out regs to make sure we won't build infrastructure. And that's why we need more than just Republicans to rescind this reg.
Just two thoughts quickly, because Dan mentioned infrastructure. He's absolutely right. And as you know, I helped negotiate that, as did others here, including Senator Capito in a big way. And we insisted on having permitting reform be part of it. And what this will do is it will reverse the progress we had hoped to make on a number of things that actually helps in terms of the environment. Think of traffic congestion. So everyone will tell you there's more CO2 emissions when you have a traffic jam than when the traffic is running smoothly. And that's one reason, in the infrastructure bill, we're trying to encourage, more development of our travel infrastructure, transit infrastructure, including mass transit, including other things. That all takes longer now. Think about reforestation. One thing the infrastructure bill has is 1.2 billion new trees on the national forests, as an example. That's going to take longer. Some of the reforestation projects have to do with erosion and other things that require this NEPA review. Think about the environmental projects we had talked about earlier, not just solar and wind, but think about the infrastructure for electric cars. That's in that legislation, $7.5 billion. That's going to take longer. So it actually runs counter to the infrastructure legislation that we just passed. And this is one thing that I feel was, in a way, pulling the rug out from under us after we had worked with the White House, worked with Democrats on both sides of the Capitol to come up with something that would help us to move forward on infrastructure. Finally, I will say it's not just the indirect costs, it's not just the cumulative costs, it's the upstream and downstream costs. And I think that's very difficult to analyze, and I think it gives regulators a huge opportunity to take their discretion and determine what, as an example, downstream costs might be. So if you have a natural gas pipeline running through my state of Ohio, or any of these pipelines these guys have talked about, by the way, it's relatively clean fossil fuel. It's needed right now. Everybody acknowledges that. And it goes across the stream. under the old NEPA rules, you would look at the impact of that stream, and you should. And that was, reasonably foreseen was the way the Trump administration talked about it as an example. Now it's not just about that stream, or it's not just about that project in effect. It's about where is that pipeline going to go, and will it result in more fossil fuels being used, and therefore will it have an impact on the climate, and therefore should a regulator not approve that project? I think that's the issue in a nutshell, as I can see it.
Can I add one thing here? The rule that they're talking about requires an evaluation of direct, indirect, and cumulative environmental impacts of the proposed action. Well, you want to talk about something that, could go on for a long period of time and create a lot of litigation. And then let's say you're going to be building a project and you have to evaluate all the direct, indirect, and cumulative aspects. That's pretty subjective. That's pretty hard to do. That's a pretty daunting task. And remember, we came out of a rule that the Trump administration put out where for an EIS, you had to get this done within a certain amount of time. 2 years for an EIS, 1 year for an EA, okay? So there was a definitive amount of time that you had for this back and forth, and you created some regulatory certainty so that you could build the project. And one other point, so if we're talking about building a transmission line, is that renewable energy or is that traditional energy? It's both, right? So if you want electricity for all these different things, you need transmission, and that could be from a renewable project. It could be from a traditional type or a fossil type energy project, right? So again, as I think Rob finished up there, I think our colleagues should join with us on this because this really is about building things in this great country.
It seems like some of you are very skeptical of Senator Manchin's deal with permitting reform. I was wondering if you had plans to talk with him about his permitting plan, and could it be something that Republicans could support when it comes up?
Well, I'll start with that. I am skeptical of the deal, and I have talked with him, and I think a lot of us have talked with him. The sequencing of what they're proposing is, in my view, I wouldn't say it's suspicious. I said it leaves open many, many questions. So what he's saying is we're going to move forward with this tax and spending bill that we've all talked about, raising taxes, spending, which we think will harm the inflation and harm the American people. We believe that to be true. But then in another 45 days, or before the end of September, I've been promised that we're going to pass permitting reform. He has a framework out there. I've said we need to see exact text because a framework really doesn't do you any good. The detail is what you need. And so I think we have skepticism because we've tried to work with our partners over on energy and our Democrat partners to try to get permitting reform and can't do it. I mean, I have a pipeline in his framework is the completion of a pipeline called the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is 95% complete. I've worked with him and the whole delegation to try to work any way we can through appropriations, through other bills, to try to help this pipeline get completed. What has happened is they've gotten the permit, and then exactly what Diana said, the legal community comes out. They end up in the circuit court, Fourth Circuit, and the Fourth Circuit has removed that permit twice under the parameters of this big and broad cumulative effects. And so you have investments of billions of dollars. You have a president who's telling other countries, we're going to bring you LNG, and yet his own administration won't let a 95% complete pipeline be completed. So I know that pipeline means a lot to Senator Manchin. It means a lot to me. But they've already disrupted it twice. Well, who's to say they won't disrupt it a third time and not give him his wish? So I just think I am very skeptical of what kind of deal can be cut on these kinds of very sensitive issues.
And I also think, I've looked at the framework. I talked to Senator Manchin just yesterday about these issues. But it kind of also comes back to the tests that we're going to put forward here as early as this week. If you are serious about permitting reform, step one is the vote in favor of our resolution. Why wouldn't you do that? Every major group in America supports it with a very small exception. So show us your commitment on how serious you are with a yes vote on this CRA. I think I think these issues are actually connected.
I mean, isn't that kind of the direct common sense here? If you want to expedite the permitting process, vote with us here on this measure right now. This is something the Senate can actually do. You don't have to wait and count on somebody else. We get to vote on it. So let's take that step right now and reduce the regulatory burden. Furthermore, why would you agree to raise taxes, to increase spending at the time when we have inflation on some kind of promise that there might be some permitting reform when look at the kind of regulation that's being put out right now?
Any other? Yep.
Have any Democrats indicated support for the vote?
I've been in discussions with a number of Democrats, and including Senator Manchin. And I think that the fact that, again, just take a look at that list, it's very one-sided on the groups that support it, including all the building trades in America. So I know for a fact that they're kind of dreading this vote because it, as I mentioned, in my view, it's a simple vote. Who do you stand with? The men and women of America who build things, or the coastal elites who shut them down? So I've been trying to talk to a lot of my Democratic colleagues. None have made commitments either way, but I think the more support we're getting for this, and like I said, we're getting a lot. We'll give you guys the statements that all these groups are putting out. I think it's going to be a tough vote for them. They got to stand up and say, do they want infrastructure? Do they want to support the working men of America? Or do they want to stand with the far left coastal elites that don't want any of that? So it's going to be an important vote. But yeah, I'm trying to work with as many Democrat senators as possible to get them to yes on this important vote.